The stars stretched endlessly across the black sea of space. As Commander Elias Brandt stood at the observation window of the diplomatic cruiser Ardent Dawn, he had seen many worlds in his time, some hostile, some breathtaking, but none ever stirred the storm inside him like the name Elaris Prime. He whispered it to himself, almost like a memory, as if saying it could summon her face. Princess Cerise Valinara. 7 years had passed since their first meeting. She had come to Earth as part of a peaceful delegation, her kind face unreadable, her eyes glowing faintly like the stars above her homeworld. At the time, Elias had been a young officer assigned to security detail, and yet, in those brief moments when she spoke to him, always with perfect grace and distance, something had rooted itself inside him. A quiet ache, a feeling that had refused to fade. Now he was going back. But not just for her. Humanity stood at a dangerous crossroads. The Shirath Dominion, a brutal, power-hungry alien empire, had already attacked 2 human colonies and threatened. More Earth's leaders were desperate for allies. The Elyari, though reclusive and officially neutral, held a powerful position in the galactic balance. Their advanced psychic abilities, control over gravity, technology, and mastery of diplomacy made them a voice others listened to. Elias's official reason for the visit was a cultural exchange to observe Elyari customs and share human knowledge. But the truth was far more urgent. His real mission was to convince the Elyari to take a side. Earth needed their help, or it wouldn't survive another cycle of war. As the ship entered orbit over Elaris's prime, Elias felt his chest tighten. The planet shimmered below like a jewel, its continents laced with glowing rivers of energy. Cities built among forests of tall, crystalline trees that caught the sunlight and scattered it in every direction. It was more beautiful than he remembered. But what shook him more was the thought of seeing her again. Would she remember him? Had she ever truly seen him at all? Landing protocol began, and within the hour, Elias stood on Elyari soil. Their capital, Virlan, was silent in a peaceful we-know noise of engines or crowded streets. Everything pulsed with soft light, as if the entire world breathed in harmony. Elyari citizens, tall and elegant, walked past in robes that shimmered like starlight, some giving him polite nods, others studying him with curious eyes. He wasn't the first human diplomat they'd hosted, but he might be the most important. Inside the Hall of Ekozan, open structure with floating, marble-like platforms and columns made of translucent stony lias waited. Then, as if time slowed, she entered. Cerise Valinara had not changed, not in the way that mattered. Her presence still demanded silence. Her silver hair flowed like water, her eyes glowing faintly violet, her expression unreadable. She wore a ceremonial wrap of deep blue and silver, her steps light, almost weightless. She came to stand before him, flanked by Elyari council members, and gave the traditional bow. Elias mirrored her gesture, respectful but firm. His pulse hammered in his chest, but he kept his expression calm. "Commander Brandt," she said, her voice smooth and controlled, "we welcome your return to Elaris Prime." There was no warmth in her tone, yet her eyes lingered on his, just a second longer than needed. That single moment told Elias what he needed to know she remembered. "The honor is mine, Princess Cerise," Elias replied, bowing again. "I bring the hopes of Earth with me." As protocol continued, Elias noted that she never once smiled, nor did she show any visible sign of connection. But he had trained in diplomacy for years, and he noticed the subtle things. Fingers twitched slightly when he spoke. How she chose to stand slightly closer to him than necessary. How, when the meeting ended, she turned to leave, but hesitated and glanced back at him. Only for a second. It was in that instant Elias felt a rush of memories, shared laughter during a tour of Earth's gardens. The quiet conversation they had beneath the northern lights, the way she had looked at the stars and whispered something in her language, not knowing he had recorded it and translated it later. "Even stars burn with longing," she had said. He had never forgotten now. Standing in a place that felt like it belonged in a dream, Elias realized something had changed. Not just in her, in the world around them. Something was brewing beneath the surface. The council members who had smiled politely were whispering behind closed doors. Liari guards who once had ceremonial weapons now wore more practical armor. And Zarishi looked calm, but her eyes carried a hidden weight. As Elias was led to his guest quarters, he looked back at the door through which Cerise had left. He didn't know what the coming days would hold: diplomatic games, political tension, or perhaps betrayal. But one thing was certain. The woman he had loved from afar was no longer part of a peaceful world. And now he was here, caught between duty and feeling, between war and hope, and the way she had looked at him. It wasn't just memory. It was something more, something unspoken, but something real. The days that followed were filled with official ceremonies, quiet walks through Elyari Gardens, and endless discussions about tradition, culture, and intergalactic peace. Elias played his part well, asked questions, smiled at the right moments, and spoke of Earth's commitment to peace. But every word he said was a step toward something greater, a deeper truth he had come to uncover, and a decision he had to guide the Elyari into making. Yet even as the formalities stretched on, his mind stayed locked on Cerise. She remained distant, yet never far. At council meetings, she always found herself seated across from him. At state dinners, she would offer brief glances between toasts, but the silence between them grew louder with each passing moment. Elias had the growing sense that something was happening behind the scenes, something even the council wasn't fully revealing. Late one evening, unable to sleep, Elias wandered through the crystalline gardens just beyond the Hall of Echoes. The moonlight shimmered through the crystal trees, casting shifting colors on the ground like spilled stardust. That's when he heard the voice. "You still walk as if your heart carries a burden." He turned. She was there, Princess Ceres, standing in the quiet glow, her hands folded in front of her, her silver hair lit by the stars. No guards, no formality, just her. Elias smiled softly. "Da-da-da. And you still appear as if you've stepped out of a dream." "Da-da-da," made her lips twitch, almost a smile but not quite. "Diplomats should not dream," she said gently. "It clouds their judgment." "Then I must be a terrible diplomat," he replied. They stood silently, the garden breathing around them. Then Cerise stepped closer, her voice quieter now, as if the trees themselves might listen. "You shouldn't be here, Elias." He blinked, surprised not by her presence but by the weight of her words. "You mean Earth shouldn't be here?" "I mean you," she said. "This mission is more dangerous than your leaders know. The Shirath Dominion, they've already begun whispering into the ears of certain council members, promises of protection, power. The Elyari are not as united as they once were." Elias stared at her, understanding slowly dawning. "You think some of them will betray your neutrality?" "I don't think," she said. "I know." The wind rustled the crystal leaves, and for the first time, Elias saw fear in her eyes. Not the fear of war, something more personal. "You came to protect Earth," she continued, "but someone will try to silence you before you can finish your mission." He took a step toward her. "Then help me stop them." "I can't," she said, her voice trembling just slightly. "Position binds me. If I speak too soon, I risk being removed from the council. Or worse, there are eyes everywhere." Elias wanted to reach for her, to comfort her, to say everything he'd held back for 7 years, but he forced himself to stay still. "Why are you telling me this, then?" She looked up at him, her gaze no longer cold or distant. It was soft, filled with emotion she could no longer hide. "Because I remember," she whispered. "I remember Earth. I remember you. And because I can't watch you walk blindly into a trap, something unspoken passed between them, an invisible thread tied between two hearts that had waited too long to speak." Elias took a breath. He had spent years imagining this moment, the words he would say, the courage he'd need. Now it was here. The world around him seemed to pause. "I have loved you for years," he said quietly. The words hung in the air like a breath never released. Her eyes widened, shocked, not angry, not rejecting, but just stunned. For a moment, she looked like someone who had forgotten how to feel and had suddenly remembered. But before she could respond, A loud chime rang out from the tower above the garden. An alarm. Red lights began to flicker in the sky, and from the distant halls, shouting could be heard. Liais's earpiece crackled to life. "Commander Brandt, report to the chamber immediately. There's been an incident. A council member has been attacked, possibly assassinated." Elias looked back at Cerise, but she was already stepping away, her face returning to its formal calm. "This is only the beginning," she said. Then she vanished into the shadows of the crystal trees, leaving Elias alone in the garden. His heart pounding with more than just fear. The council hall of Alaris Prime was in chaos. Crystalline walls flickered with red emergency light as armored Elyar guards swept through the corridors, searching for clues. The once peaceful chamber, known for its serenity and wisdom, now echoed with fear and tension. Commander Elias Brandt entered through the tall arched doors, his uniform slightly disheveled, his expression sharp. He was no longer just a diplomat, he was a man walking into danger. The victim was Counselor Drell Thoros, long-standing supporter of Elyari neutrality. Found unconscious in his private chamber, no wounds visible, but his mind had been attacked. A psychic assault, the kind that left no physical trace, only silence behind the eyes. Elyari medics worked quickly, but whispered among themselves, this was no accident. Elias stood over the counselor, then turned to the other members gathering around. Eyes watched him closely, some filled with concern, others with suspicion. It was clear now, someone on the inside wanted this mission to fail. "Who knew about my meeting with Counselor Theris earlier today?" Elias asked calmly, scanning the room. Silence, then a voice spoke, low and certain. "Everyone in this room." A list. She stood near the high dais, her face calm, but her eyes holding something he couldn't read. She stepped down slowly, and as she moved, the room grew quieter. Even in crisis, her presence demanded respect. Cerise looked around at her fellow council members. This attack was not random. Counselor Theris supported peaceful negotiation with Earth. His silencing was strategic. One of the older counselors scoffed. "Are you suggesting we betray our own people?" "No," Cerise said evenly, "but someone in this room already has." Elias watched the way she moved, how her words held weight even when she spoke gently. Room began to argue again. He felt something else, something beneath the surface. He leaned closer to one of his aides and whispered, "Pull the surveillance logs. I want a list of everyone who entered Theris's chambers in the last 12 hours staff. Guards, visitors, discreetly." The aide nodded and slipped away. After the meeting dissolved into arguments and half-truths, Elias found himself walking through the palace corridors alone again. He was angry not just at the attack but at the silence. He had come here to prevent a war, to protect Earth, but now he realized the war had already started, quietly, in shadows. The Elyari were divided, and someone wanted him gone before he could bring their alliance to life. Later that evening, Cerise found him once more, this time in a quiet balcony overlooking the glowing city of Sarathal. The buildings below shimmered like glass towers kissed by starlight. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "For what?" Elias asked. "For not answering you," she said, her voice barely above the wind. He turned to face her, eyes full of emotion. "You don't have to explain. I didn't say it to demand something from you. Said it because I couldn't keep hiding it anymore." She looked down, her hands clasped. "You should have hidden it. Feelings like that, ... They make us weak in politics, vulnerable. A single word can be used against us." "Then let them try," Elias said. "I didn't come here just for diplomacy. I came because I believe in what we can build. Not just peace, but something real, something worth risking for." Cerise hesitated, then took a step forward. "What if I feel it too?" she asked, voice trembling slightly. "But what if it endangers both our worlds?" He didn't answer. Instead, he gently reached out and held her hand. For a moment, neither spoke. It was enough. But before they could say more, a sharp buzz came from his communicator. His aide's voice crackled through. "Commander, we have the logs. Someone erased the original records, but we recovered fragments. And there's one name that keeps showing up near Theris's quarters. Someone with high clearance. ... "Who?" Elias asked, his voice steady. There was a pause. Princess Cerise. Elias froze. His heart skipped, but not from love this time. From shock. Cerise stepped back slightly, confusion on her face. "That's not possible," she whispered. "I was never near." But Elias had already raised his eyes to hers, filled with questions he didn't want to ask. And Cerise, for the first time, looked unsure. The palace of Sarathel felt colder now. The vibrant energy Elias had felt on his first day had dimmed, replaced by whispers, narrowed glances, and a question that refused to die. Did Cerise betray him? Did she betray everyone? Elias paced the quiet hallway outside the Eliari intelligence chamber, the cracked remains of shattered trust heavy in his chest. The surveillance data didn't lie, or so the analysts claimed. Her clearance code had accessed Counselor Thoris's chamber. Not once. 3 times. Elias didn't want to believe it. It's not her, not Cerise. But the deeper he looked, the more the pieces refused to fit. Cerise hadn't spoken to him since the report. She'd gone silent, vanishing from the palace's public spaces, retreating into the inner sanctums where only Eliari royalty were permitted. Elias tried twice to see her, each time turned away, told she was in meditation. He knew that was code for isolation. But Elias wasn't the kind of man to let silence settle, especially not when he could feel the truth still lingering beneath the surface. He pulled every thread he could find, records, memories, conversations long forgotten, until finally a name surfaced. One he hadn't heard in years, Calvin Valinara, the late brother of Princess Cerise. Calvin had been a legend among both the Eliari and human diplomats. He was Cerise's older sibling, brilliant, rebellious, and fiercely protective of his people. But he died under mysterious circumstances 5 years ago during a failed peace summit between the Eliari and the Sharath Dominion. Some whispered that he had been assassinated. Others claimed he'd defected and was silenced for it. The official report said his ship had been lost in a solar storm, but Cerise had never spoken of him, not once. Driven by instinct, Elias found his way to the royal archives in an ancient place beneath the palace, guarded not by soldiers, but by layers of psionic encryption. With help from his trusted aide and a reluctant Eliari archivist, he gained access to restricted files. There, in the dim blue glow of Eliari data scrolls, he found what he wasn't supposed to: a classified transcript. Dated 1 month before Calvin's disappearance, Calvin had confronted the council, accused one of their own of secretly dealing with the Shirath, inviting war, not preventing it. His words had been stricken from the record, but not completely erased, and Cerise had been there? She had defended him, but her defense hadn't been enough. Elias sank into the crystal bench, the transcript in his hand trembling. Cerise had known her brother had been betrayed by their own people. And now, it seemed, history might be repeating itself. That night he found her not in the palace, but in the temple gardens beyond the city, standing beneath the twin moons. She wore no crown, no royal garments, no, just a simple pale robe that shimmered softly in the moonlight. She turned before he spoke, as if she had already felt him coming. "You found it," she said. Elias nodded slowly. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because truth isn't welcome in a world built on perfect lies," Cerise whispered. "They feared my brother because he saw too much. I stayed silent because I thought I could protect what remained. But now they've turned their fear on me." "But why your access code?" Elias asked, stepping closer. "Why would someone frame you?" Her eyes glistened in the moonlight, but she didn't blink. "And because I'm the last voice on the council who still believes in peace with Earth. The others, they're already making plans. War will give them power, and fear will make the people obey." Elias stared at her for a long moment. "Then we can't stay quiet. We need to expose them. Together." She smiled faintly, sadly. "Oh, you still trust me?" "I never stopped," he said, and meant it, just as she reached for his hand. A piercing alarm echoed from the city below. The sky shimmered, then darkened. A fleet of ships, black and angular, dropped from the clouds and marked, but unmistakably Shirath, and they were not here to talk. The sky above Elaris Prime burned gold and violet as the first blasts from the Shirath fleet tore through the outer defense ring. Alarms howled across the capital, and the once serene crystal spires shuddered with the rumble of war. Civilians fled into underground shelters. LER guards rushed to position, and the palace turned into a fortress overnight. Elias Brandt stood at the command dais inside the war chamber, his hands clenched on the glowing interface. He was surrounded by LERI officers who barely hid their distrust, but none of that mattered now. Not when the Shirath were minutes away from breaching the atmosphere, and not when Cerise stood beside him no longer in robes, but in full ceremonial armor, her silver hair braided like the warriors of old. There was no fear in her eyes now, only fire. They planned this, Elias said, watching enemy ships move with brutal precision. It's the ones who framed you. They knew the Shirath were coming. Cerise nodded grimly. Some of the council were in contact with them for months. Secret treaties, promises of shared power. They wanted me removed so no one would question their response to the invasion. And now, he asked. Now, they'll call it a holy war, and I'll be the traitor who fled. Elias took a breath. Then we take back the truth. He activated the data core they'd recovered from the archive's proof of the council's betrayal, Calvin's warnings, and Cerise's innocence. With help from Elias's Earth-based AI, the message was broadcast through the palace's emergency COMM-net. Across the capital, every LERI citizen saw the truth. The council tried to jam the signal. Too late, riots broke out within hours, not of chaos, but of clarity. LERI pilots refused to obey false orders. Soldiers once loyal to the old council turned toward Princess Cerise with new eyes, but there wasn't time for celebration. The Shirath fleet was already descending. Elias and Cerise led a desperate counterattack. Earth's reinforcements were still hours away, and LERI stood alone. They boarded an LERI strike vessel fast, lightly armed but capable of slipping through enemy ranks. The plan was madness. Disable the Shirath command ship from within, forcing the fleet into disarray. As they passed through the upper atmosphere, fire streaked across the skies, both beautiful and terrifying. Elias felt the weight of every decision he had made, of every word he hadn't said. And then, in the silence between weapon locks and coordinates, he turned to Cerise and finally spoke the truth. "I have loved you for years," he said. She blinked. "Elias, I thought I could keep it hidden. Tell myself it was just respect, duty. But it was never that. From the moment you stepped onto Earth soil, you've lived in my thoughts. You were the only reason I said yes to this mission. Not the alliance, not the war. You." She stared at him, unblinking, unreadable. Then her lips parted with something he didn't expect. "I know," he blinked. "You what?" "I've always known," she said quietly. "Your thoughts have whispered to mine. Even when you tried to shield them, I felt it. I felt you. I thought if I returned it, I'd weaken your sense of duty. So I waited. Waited for what? For the moment you stopped choosing peace for the sake of others, and started choosing it because of me." Their fingers met just once, before the cockpit shuddered. They'd reached the flagship. What followed was chaos, narrow corridors, plasma fire, psionic pulses that cracked walls. Elias and Cerise fought as one, human instincts and LERI precision blending in perfect rhythm. They reached the core, overloaded its control circuits, and broadcast a system-wide shutdown command keyed to LERI frequencies. The Shirath fleet faltered. Their ships spiraled, directionless, confused. Earth's fleet arrived in time to force the retreat. The war never came. In the aftermath, Cerise was crowned High Sovereign of the LERI. Her first act was to dissolve the old council and forge a new alliance, built not on politics, but on truth. Elias stood beside her, not just as a diplomat, but as something more. Their love was never declared before crowds, never etched in stone, but when she reached for his hand in front of thousands, no one doubted what had bloomed in the fire of war and truth. And in that moment, across two galaxies, one thing became undeniably clear. Humanity was not alone.